Okay, so I think we're live, so we're ready to begin. Um, so welcome everyone, and very warm welcome to Dolly, who's joining us all the way from Melbourne. Just very quickly to introduce Dolly, I'm sure many of us are familiar with her and her work. But Dolly is based at the University of Melbourne. She's an anthropologist, but she's also been trained in law, which actually was something I didn't know. And I read while I was putting together the the event. But she's also trained in law, and she's in fact practiced at the Guwahati High Court and the Supreme Court of India. And she's also been someone who's been working on questions of militarization, looking at the kinds of laws like ASPA, looking at ideas of disturbed areas, etc. And it comes together when one understands that the training is both in anthropology and in law. So her work also has been like the book that we'll be discussing today. Has also been looking at the border area between Assam and Nagaland and looking at the foothill landscape in the backdrop of the context of resource politics as well as militarization, as the title of the book suggests. And she's sort of been publishing widely on questions of gender and militarization, on resource politics, land ownership, and how all of these different questions sort of interact in very important and complex ways in the landscape, amidst also a very diverse and heterogeneous demography. Which has historically different communities that have historically different kinds of relationships with one another, and the book also sort of brings that out in terms of the several layers in which communities, institutions, actors find ways and means of interacting with each other and negotiating one another in this space of the borderlands and the foothills. So, what we're going to be doing today is also to make the session more interactive. And what we will, in fact, begin with is a few students who have read the book, who will make a few opening remarks and comments on the book, and things that for them they stood out, and things that they would like to discuss and engage with Dolly on her book and on the kinds of ideas that she presents. So we'll just begin by a round from the students who sort of put in their comments, and then have Dolly respond, and then from there, of course, it'll be open, and we can have sort of an open-ended discussion and a back and forth. So why don't I open it up to the students if Devashish is here? Next, or here out of all of you all, you can begin. Saurabh? Saurabh, are you here? Abhilasha? I have a
Yes.
feeling something's happening.
Ma'am, I'm here.
Yes, okay. So, we can begin with the I'm sorry, just hang on. So we'll begin, whichever one of you, whoever would like to speak and sort of put in these comments, those of you who have read, you can just go one after another. So a very warm welcome to you, Dolly, and hoping to have a lovely, engaging discussion today. Yeah. Abhilasha, you can begin.
Thank you for that. Just a request. Yeah, tell me your name. Yeah, tell me your name, and here's a surprise element. So it's a request from my side. So for students, tell me your name, maybe something about your work, so I have a context from where you're coming, and whether you are just starting, you are writing your PhD, you are pre-field, what are you being trained in, like in anthropology or history, so that I think the conversation then makes sense to us, right? I have a context where you're coming from. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi,
Yeah.
can I intervene for a while? I think Saurabh and Devashish is having an issue here. I think, can we wait for a few minutes?
Yeah, they can join. Don't worry, they'll join. When they do, then they can speak. So we'll start with Abhilasha for now, yeah?
Okay, okay.
So hello all. I am Abhilasha, and I'm a student of history in the over here, and I am writing my thesis on epidemics in Assam, uh, and that is the it's I mean, it's unfortunate and fortunate both, because I'm writing the thesis in during these times. So these epidemics are, I mean, from a historical perspective, from the 1860s to 1950s. The tentative, I mean, this is my tentative project, and probably it might change as I go on. Uh, but
So can I
yes.
ask you, Abhilash, which year are you in? Which year PhD? So,
Uh, so, ma'am, I am in my third year right now, and I have to begin my archival work going from now. Yeah. And I really enjoyed reading the book. I mean, it's something very enduring, very real, with ethnographic works, that that I felt with this book too. The previous, I mean, just to relate it to some other books that I read recently, were Radhika Govindarajan's work on animal intimacies, which was also an ethnographic work, and Anu Jolai's work on forests with tigers, and that was I think published in 2010. So these both were ethnographic works, and with after which we read during our coursework with Professor Saikya, and ma'am, I mean, your work fit in very well after my coursework, and really enjoyed it. Um, uh, I actually definitely liked reading the chapter on extractive relations, which was chapter 5. Uh, and the question that emerged from the chapter was, what did friendship mean in a foothill landscape where uh, coal mining was is going on, and complicated relationships are definitely in place. So what does friendship mean in such a landscape? And I felt that what you wrote was that friendship and coal mining in the foothills of Assam and Nagaland was seasonal in nature. Both of them were seasonal in nature, and it was during the coal mining season, that is from November to April, a very short period of time when friendships and alliances actually um, emerge very strongly between coal traders from Assam and Naga landowners, but also alliances with the cultivators that are present on the foothills, and other traders with timber, rubber, and activities of grazing, foraging, and fishing that is going on. So there's a multiple of activities that are really there, and friendships and alliances that forge between all of them. But all of these friendships, precisely the coal mining alliances, are grounded on the resource as extractive. Um, I mean, really founded on how resources are extracted, and the power networks that are going around. And for such a landscape where Naga insurgents are actually permitting the coal trading, friendship very is an essential component for the traders to actually navigate through the power networks. Another thing that was really interesting for me in this chapter was the performance of documents, the document performances, which for me, as I look to, or I mean, as I look into documents, that particular section was really interesting, because the coal traders and the landowners are party to the formation, to the writing of the documents, These documents are essentially the clauses of how trading and mining is to be carried out, but these are not actually official documents. These are informal documents, but they give an aura of officialdom. And most of these documents are written in English. But the interesting fact is that neither of the parties, neither the coal traders from Assam or the Naga landowners, are English speakers. But they still go ahead with these document performances where they sign it and they read it out aloud to each other. So it's like a very official political kind of a um, performance. Yeah. And there are also other alliances which get formed in these foothills, which are among the land owning cultivators. They may be Zoom cultivators or settled cultivators, practicing settled agriculture. And what they are essentially doing is engaging in labor exchanges, which are called Hauri, and the extension of hospitality, giving lunch to each other, providing tea, and basically non-monetary transactions which go on are the essence of these friendship. But saying said all this, you also mention, you also caution that all friendships are not so lovey-dovey in nature, because uh, what about the landless workers? They do not get into very very good relationships with each other. I mean, it's very difficult for them to engage with people who are much more powerful than them, and they end up losing out a little bit more than others. So the way you navigate between all the relationships between the different communities that are there on the foothills, um, that was interesting for me. I would leave at this and would ask my other friends to pick up from here.
Do you have a question so I can come back to you, Abhilasha, or it's just a reading? Oh,
Yeah,
hello.
this.
Uh,
Yeah, I
Hello,
have a
ma'am.
question.
Hello, everyone.
Oh,
Tell me. Yeah,
yeah.
Abhilasha, you finish it.
Yeah,
Yes, you have a
yeah.
question.
I was wondering if the Howry custom is mostly seen among women workers. I mean, is it a very gendered kind of a relationship and alliance, or male workers also engage in such?
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hello, ma'am. Hello, everyone. Uh, my name is Devashish. I'm a research student in this department as well. First of all, I would like to congratulate ma'am on the release of a documentary, Season of Light, which is very well made, very well shot documentary. It's in the YouTube, and I urge everyone to just go and watch it. It's very, so now, coming to the book, Living in Life and Coal, Resources, Politics, Militarization.
Tell me something
Yes, ma'am.
about yourself. So when you say you're a researcher, what do you do? Which department? Have you finished your PhD?
Uh,
Are you writing? Tell me. I
no,
want
ma'am.
to.
I am no, ma'am. I'm on the verge of going to the field work. It's about to start. So I'm at that stage now. So
Were you the
this
one who
book,
wrote to me? Devashish
yeah, yeah, yes,
Niharika?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, nice to meet you finally.
Yes, ma'am. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, continue. Sorry, I won't interrupt you anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Now, uh, this book is especially important book to me because my PhD work will be based on an area which also happens to be a kind of foothill borderland area. So I got to read this book at a time when I was really confused as to how to go about understanding this landscape and the kind of society that it hosts. So it is helping me in this regard. There are a few points which I want to put forward as an opening statement, which I think is important. Um, uh, uh, the book has put forward a kind of framework which will be helpful in terms of understanding the in between places, so to speak, like foothill borderlands, which are resource hubs and heavily militarized, which can be even characterized by borders, geographical as well as social. Their transgression with multiple ethnicity, their interactions, solidarity, conflicts, and also the presence of multiple type of sovereignties working simultaneously at the same time. So this framework will definitely help us in terms of giving us a kind of a fresh pair of lenses to look beyond this conventional hill binary kind of a framework which has been already used to understand the northeast area. Um, Coming to the second chapter, which is the special focus of today's discussion, I think the feminist lens that has been used in this chapter is quite evident. I mean, uh, the most interesting part for me is the evocation of the term morom. Uh, Obviously, we cannot find an equivalent English term for this word, but at the same time, it covers a whole range of from romantic love to mercy, gratitude, compassion, and also relation to the state as well. I mean, we all know the kind of women's body has become a kind of a battleground, no? So a side, so to speak, on which our battle for caste, class, or ethnicity are waged. So we can get this kind of reflection in this chapter as well, where various classification of moron are visible in gendered politics, where women's bodies are seen or used as a site of maintaining ethnic purity, uh, because ethnic purity has become some kind of an obsession as a political or a moral marker in terms of claiming territorial rights as well as other nationalist aspirations, which again boils down to control of land and other resources. So it's very patriarchal kind of setting. I also like the idea that have considered kind of subtle of nationalist right, where it's selective in terms of uh, giving importance to some character and some others when it comes to writing the official history, because a kind of purity has to be maintained. For example, the local foothill legend of Godapani and Damini is very interesting. In it is not even Dalimi is not even considered as a Dalimi story is not even considered as a real. Dalimi has been reduced to just a fiction because of course she belonged to a different ethnicity. So and it doesn't conform to the purist norm. So on the other hand, Godapani's other wife, which is who is Joymuti, is called Koti, the pure one, the pious one, who sacrificed a lot for her husband, and is elevated to a kind of ideal Assamese women to be any. I think I find it very interesting that critique. Uh, um, the last point I want to put forward is uh, storytelling kind of a writing that you have adopted, and which is very gripping for the readers. The narrative type of writing in this book, which I think helps us to have a kind of intimate kind of an understanding of the social, cultural composition of this violent geography. So, yeah, that's all I want to say as an opening statement. I thank you.
Saurabh, you're here. You can go next if you like. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Am I like, I don't know if my internet is bad or what? Like, am I audible?
I think it was Devashish's.
Okay, okay. All right. Hi everyone. Hi, ma'am. I'm Saurav. I am a third year PhD student. I'm working on the topic of land conservation and displacement. So, like, I really liked and enjoyed reading the book. And firstly, what I just wanted to mention was like what I found in the introduction in the first chapter was how about when we talk about any kind of extraction or these unequal social power relations which happens during when there is a quote unquote development issue involved. The idea of the centrality of land that comes forward, which came out in the beginning of your book, like how these lands in these spaces, even in this foothill, even though there is so much conflict, land is central in the way like it is a convergence of identity, community, culture, kinship, economy, and as a political space as well. So beginning with that note, I just wanted to move to the second chapter, which is being focused on. So I liked how, like, if I understood correctly, how you have described Moram as a social relation in the space for like territoriality, violence, and power, and it acts through the existing power relations, which are highly gendered in nature. These gendered social relations become the core of maintaining the socio-political ties and connections and uh, like shapes towards formation of group identities. And so thinking about that and I just view I began to view love in these spaces as something that is not personal anymore. That love has become a matter of sovereignty. Love has become a matter of conflict and about identity, about ethnic purity. And when you invoked ethnic purity, it showed how ethnic purity becomes significant uh, in these spaces to draw territorial boundaries. And these territorial boundaries based on ethnic purity are drawn on ethnic bodies. And when it intertwines with the power relation of patriarchy, we see how, not just in this case of ethnic purity and territorial boundary, but in many other cases, when these intertwine with the power relation of patriarchy, uh, the vulnerability and marginality of women and their bodies are more amplified. And whereas women's bodies, where you describe very nicely, like becomes a space of contention and negotiation, and then got me to think how we talk about wars and fought on women's bodies, but when we talk about wars, we only think about wars that are huge, like partition or world wars. But then, after going through your book, like we have to think of war not just in those big spheres, but in daily activities, in daily conflicts, in daily contexts. How those small conflicts and uh, negotiations also happen over women's bodies. And so through the story of Lulu, Savitri, and Dalimi, you've captured in one like phrase where you use, which you use as like maintenance of fiction of ethnic purity. So these examples are used, like the legend of Dalimi is used, but at the same time, it is also used for reconciliation whenever it is necessary. With that note, I'll just end us with one final observation and a question, that when we see the issue of identity and ethnic purity, we tend to see and argue how the outside perceive ethnic purity as a marker of legitimacy for self-determination and agency, especially in cases of indigenous people. And we tend to problematize the disassociation of such communities uh, to have like quote unquote modern aspirations and desires. And so like we never gave deeper thought about the ethnic purity force from the inside, which came out in your book, about how the assertion of ethnic purity was important for the drawing the territorial boundaries and for drawing group identities. So just to end it with the question, that do you think these is from the inside and from the outside, do they act in relation to each other or independently? How much, like what's the correlation? Thank you so much, and I look forward to discussing more with you.
Thanks, sort of. Pranab, you're there?
Yeah, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi everyone. I'm productive. And I'm a third year PhD student. I'm working on indigeneity and development. So the book is wonderful, and it really helps me in understanding what development is, and also the aspirations of people. So I'm basically focusing on the chapter carbon fantasies and aspirations. So, in a landscape of resource extraction, where there are numbers of actors involved, there are frequent uh, conflicts and alliances. Amid this, one can see that though there are conflicts and alliances, though there are militarization, people have fantasies and dreams of earning a good livelihood and securing a better future in a very complex situation. So one can see that not only the Nagas but also the valley people are dreaming around the carbon fields. They want to really get a secure future or secure a better future from these carbon fields. So, however, what we see is in this extractive landscape. Uh, there are emerging issues of increasing social inequalities, unequal power relation, where the one we can see that the wealthy Nagas buys of all the lands which has the capabilities of producing coals and oils. So although uh, this control over resources is done by invoking Article 371A of the Indian Constitution, of controlling of Indian Constitution of community control of resources, but the profits are reaped by the individual owner than the collective community. So even the Article 371, if we look at it, it should have been benefiting the whole section of community, but one can see that the wealthy people reaps the profits. So, moreover, when we see these activities, surrounding carbon fantasies, there are also lots of environmental issues involved. So, however, given the environmental issues, people's aspiration and fantasies always, they are always there. Apart from the environmental damage. Moreover, when we see uh, this landscape and this fantasies, the zone of fantasy, there are aspiration. It is the landscape becomes highly gendered because these aspirations are also highly gendered. As you have said that the extractive economy is predominantly masculine. So women does not hold a position of power and decision on this extractive economy. It is argued that reason behind not holding position is rooted in property regime in these areas where women does not have any position or ownerships on the lands and other resources. It is also argued that the power comes from having ownership on lands and other resources. So in this extractive economy, women just take the role of caretaking and helping the mines, which is not a problem until there is a demand for inheritance, or when there is a challenge against the inheritance of the male members of the community. Thus, it also increase in when the mining activities intensifies. It also challenges the spaces of women, the little space that are left for the women in the foothills, like their Zoom field, which are threatened by this extractive activity. As a result, threatens their space of friendships, like you call Hauri. Hauri is a practice where there is an exchange of friendships and love, and also their source of income from their produce. So, from whatever I have observed from this chapter, is this book tries to breaks the challenges the romantic imageries about linear understanding of indigenous population on their egalitarian nature, love for nature, etc., etc. Although indigenous population gets associated being nature lover, and this indigenous population try to find out a living from the resources surrounding them, and they want to improve their livelihoods from these earnings. So that's the reason, despite all the hardships, people are hopeful in having a carbon future. So they don't move away. They look a better future in this in this uh, in this mines, uh, uh, in this oil fields. Thank you.
Thanks, Pranab. Sai, you are here?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Hi, ma'am. I'm Kiran. Uh, I'm doing my second year PhD in international relations, and I work. My research interests are in the maritime security in the Indo-Pacific region. So, yes, I've read the complete book, ma'am, and each chapter actually complements very well all the 7 chapters. So, but I'd like to specifically talk about chapter 4, the herds, and the chapter 7, the carbon citizenship. But before I get there, just to just to add up to what Pranab has talking about carbon fantasies and aspirations. Just I mean, I was just curious to know, is this chapter a transition point in the whole book? When we actually see in at the start of the book, where the book starts with you going in a jeep, where we see the barbed fences, the security checkpost test. So the first few initial chapters gives us a impression that, okay, this is the carbon landscape which actually influences the life of the people. But once it comes to the chapter 6, or at the end of the chapter 5 and the start of the chapter 6, we feel like, okay, the reader feels like, okay, the carbon fantasies of the people have also played an equal role in the current security or societal life of the of the region as a whole. So since the book talks about society and state and the carbon landscape as an uh, as an as an variable in this, so I thought, okay, this chapter has actually been a transition point in the book. I'm not sure. I may be wrong, but I'm just curious to know, how this chapter has played a role in this. And coming to chapter 4, the hurts. It actually took me back to my first ethnographic reading, the cockfight in Indonesia, the description. It actually took that was my first ethnography, and when I really came back to this reading the herds, I mean, I could go the cockfights fighting there, and yes, so it was so much. I mean, the two communities, the Nagas and even the ethnicities among the Nagas and the Assamese, and how they're actually fighting for not just for the economical or the ethnicities, but they're also fighting for the places also there. It is like they need a place just not to uh, reinforce their identity, but also for their economic and growth well-being also. So this hurts, I mean, the marketplace. So we see the many relationships there, and how, I mean, though the description gives us a everyday account, or I mean what happens in the marketplace, but it so closely tells us what actually happens there, what are the relationships over there, and what are the porous boundaries between both the regions. So the plantations and the marketplace, and even the security checkpost, which I mean, in the times of conflict, whenever a land has been grabbed or whatever happens. So it is like, what are the hurdles? I mean, each community or each people or ethnicity or people living in that particular part of land has to overcome to reinforce their identity. And it feels like every day it is like a continuous loop that they need to reinforce this. And this I could actually find the meaning even in the carbon citizenship in this chapter 7, where there are checkposts each and in every place, and the people are continuously frisked, and the hmm, and the carbon citizenship also, the chapter talks about how, like, if you talk about the three agencies in the book, of the two states, Assamese and Nagas, I somehow felt the agency of the Indian, of the central government as a whole, has been missing. It has been said that you have been to the state-run ONGC office, but somehow they did not talk to you about what are they, the political thoughts about what thought about the region. So maybe, I mean, I felt the agency of the central government has been missing, and or they're acting as a gatekeepers over here, so that we are not actually getting so what role they have played in the historicity of this region, which still continues to this day. So, and I have also there is this in the chapter 4 or in the chapter 5, there was this village councils where we see in where which is funding. No, again, I mean, are the village heads and the insurgent groups are equally to blame to this unstable atmosphere which was going on there, as we have seen the hierarchy in the Nagaland state. I mean, has been the village heads and the village councils occupy a very prominent place. So, I mean, will there be a equal blame, or this the hierarchy has made things as it is we see now? And mm, yes, ma'am. So this is what I want. And there was just one last thing which I wanted to ask you, since we've seen an increasing role of the union, the central government in today's state politics, not just in the northeast region, even in the southern states, even in the interstate conflicts like the water sharing, the boundary disputes. So, I mean, what could we make out of the very large role, which the external role or hard power role, which the central government actually makes it presents felt by putting in this paramilitary forces on the ground, so that it instills a sense of fear and in our own existence. So just wanted to address this few things with you. Yes, I think there is no one left after me. I think we are done with the student
No,
discussions.
we have
Yes,
one more, Kiran.
one more. Sorry, ma'am. Yes. Sorry. So,
Thank you.
sorry. Yes.
Ananda?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. So, my name is Anindo. I'm in my first year of PhD in development studies. So, my work is on the emergence of informal economic activities in the satellite township of Rajarhat New Town, located in the peripheries of Kolkata. So, first of all, ma'am, I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book, and the chapter that fascinated me the most was the seventh chapter titled Carbon Citizenship. In this chapter, you trace out the formation of carbon citizenship from the extraction of hydrocarbon resources under the militarized presence of the Indian state. It is really interesting how you connect the two aspects of the zone being zone of interest to the technocrats, and also the region being a disturbed area as announced by the Indian state. Uh, this chapter also powerfully sort of brings out the colonial relationship that has come to prevail between the military and the people inhabiting the northeastern states. You also talk about the insidious circular logic of being tagged as disturbed area, and suspicion towards those living in the disturbed area. I believe it properly captures the attitude of distrust and suspicion of an army who are given the task of quote unquote controlling a population that they hardly consider as their own. Also, the construction of Bhalmanu or good, bankable, reliable citizens are heavily designed by the military and the ONGC. And also the military that has been given the extra constitutional provisions to solve the problems of insurgency. So connecting all these dots, you have allowed me to have an comprehensive understanding of the practices of resource extraction in a militarized landscape. So I was also in the previous week. I was also watching on YouTube one of your sessions in UCLA, where you mentioned there that about the emergence of new theories by writing about the complexity of connections, relations, and fractures. So in all these chapters, and especially in the seventh chapter, I think that is very evident. And uh, the the question that I have is that I was wondering if you can please elaborate a little bit on the need of exploring these complexities of connections, relations, and fractures in order to build theory from the ground. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Anand. Uh, so, Dolly, it's over to you if you'd like to respond.
Sure. Wow. I have never taken notes on my book like with such details. So IIT, PhD, I think Community Development Studies program, you all are amazing. Thank you so much for inviting me and for doing such a generous reading of my first book. I look at it and I find, so many things that are there for you all to, I think, take forward, and and make sure that it's full for you all as you proceed with the work. So as you know that I'm zooming in from Melbourne, and I live here on really a settler colonial landscape with a very violent history here in Australia. So I would like to start the conversation by acknowledging the indigenous people of the land, the Wurundjeri people on whose land I live. I earn a livelihood. I'm very grateful to them. And I acknowledge elders from the past, the present, and emerging among the indigenous people here. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take time to look at the conversations that very generously, a community of students have given me. I'm looking first at Abhilasha's, how can I say, her reading, and this the extractive relations that you read about, I think it was very central and core, and it also relates back to storytellers of the foothills. I think chapter 2, where I'm referring to Mr. Patton, who actually keeps a lot of documents. You might have come across that. What's really important here for me to relate to as I look at the book is Moss, right? Marcel Moss's work on, let's say, archaic societies, where the idea of exchange and gift was so integral and important for him to actually talk about hospitality and how the idea of social relations, friendships, and hospitality is actually really founded on something that's very anxiety driven, right? And we can also see it, right? You don't know whether that person is going to be your friend or not, right? In particular circumstances. That's why even in our, I think, everyday language, we have things like, oh, fair weather friends, right? And so that's, I think, something universal about us as human species when we're looking for a kind of connection. And so among anthropologists, I think sociologists, a lot of social science students and researchers, myself, and I was in grad school, the Mossian idea of potlatch, right, of gift, even the anxiety that today you give a gift to someone else and the apprehension, right? What do you do when you receive a gift? Do you return? Do you not return? Beapabo, napabo, babiswa. Once you return a gift your auntie gave you, that's it. You're doomed, right? so so that kind of anxiety that's there. One thing that I would really like to mention is that for Moss, he takes that idea of the idea of the gift from really communities, indigenous communities in Canada and the United States. And I think this is where I would really want to retrieve the idea that the deep notions of hospitality and sociality that we're talking about, and we really all refer to Moss, right, as the foundational person, but we have to invoke the indigenous community among whom this practice was so integral for the political, right, and the spiritual and the economic lives. And not really invoke a Frenchman who wrote about this, but go back to the communities who are in many ways still practicing it. Right? And I think that becomes really central and important. So the question that you have about Howry at the end, like women workers, is it gendered? When I was doing my fieldwork, it was very gendered. And I think there's a photo, right, in the book. There's a photo you can see. And also the special thing about the Howry in the foothills is that Assamese caste Hindu women wouldn't participate in it. right? Because they look down on such things. And remember, it's between Nagas and Adivasi women. So you won't find any caste Hindu women there. They'll look down on it. They will not hang out in such spaces. So once again, it's practiced among communities where they can't afford to pay a wage to the worker. Right. So, for instance, if you come to my field this season, next season I'll come to your field. So, actually, at the basis of it, once again, we go back to the reciprocal relationship that's there in the field. If you can buy labor, immediately your relationship changes between the Malik and the worker, right? It's very automatic. You won't go and do Hauri in a tea plantation, for instance. Yeah. So I think that tells us a lot about how Hauri, in a sense, is very fragile, but at the same time really brings people together. This kind of reciprocity actually is very, very common across the region that we come from, and I would say across the Himalayas. That among a lot of communities, and so I refer instead also to a continuing tradition in the hills, let's say in Wokha district, right? But of a very different nature, where peers go to each other's farms or fields, I would say, to help out during.
Yeah, I think we'll just wait for Dolly to reconnect. It's probably her connection.
Hello. Hi, so I'm back. Can you all hear me now? Vasundhara, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Right.
lost you for a moment, so we kind of waited for you to connect back.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So I think coming back to Debashish and his reading of the book, what do we do with? He didn't give me any questions, so maybe I'll just thank him for the generous reading of the book. He did write to me that his field site was also a foothill area between Assam and Arunachal Pradesh, and I wanted to ask him if he's aware that in that region, in that area, they speak something called Nephamis, right? And I want him to be a little bit more careful. Debashish, be careful when you're going to the field, because Assamese reviewers, when they review my book and they mention the chapter of Morom, they always say that the Assamese word Morom, and I very clearly mention in my book that this is a Nagamese word, right? And 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 every Assamese reviewer have taken it for granted that it's an Assamese word, and it comes back to the point that I've always made, right, about the idea of language and superiority. And when I look at the reviews, I just chuckle. They might have read an entire book, but they really got the essence wrong, right? Once again, of the language that I was speaking in the foothills of Assam and Nagaland, I was speaking Nagamese. And the women who were talking to me were talking to me in Nagamese. And that's where I was really understanding or trying to figure out the concept of Morom in the field, in a space where impurity, including language, constituted that social world. Yeah. So when you go to the field in the foothills of Assam and Arunachal Pradesh, remember they speak something called Nephamis there. All right. So it's a Eastern Frontier Agency, and it's also a mixture of many, many different languages together, and that's the beauty of it. You might, if you don't listen properly, you might just think that they're speaking, Nepali or or Assamese or Hindi, but there's a very beautiful tone that's going there. So in a sense, I want you to capture that, and I'm very much looking forward to how you're going to, I think, explore that area. Um, Thank you for actually mentioning that, Morom and the feminist lens becomes important for the book. And surely you, I think, read the stories of Dalimi, Godapani, and Joymoti very well, right? In a sense of what is purity, because the idea of purity doesn't lie in the foothills. The idea of a Naga sense of purity and an Okhomia sense of purity is deep in the valley or really high up in the mountain. And that's an aspect I bring in to the chapter on state love. Storytelling is so integral to the world and to the region that we come from. And for us to be doing field work, we have to foreground that. And that becomes very, very central and important. And because we're really talking about storytelling, one of the persons who really inspired me to think about that, and I'll just read, right? It's from page 43, and he's an American environmental historian. His name is William Cronin, and I'm reading page 43, where he notes that the cultural values of people as storytelling creatures struggling to find the meaning of their place in the world carries us back and forth across the boundary between people and nature to reveal just how culturally constructed boundaries are. Right. So it may mean social, it may mean physical, and so that's something that I would like to give you as a gift as you go and prepare the field to do amazing field work. Um, Saurav, I heard that you work on conservation, so I'm very, I think, excited. And rightfully so, you capture the meaning of land, right? Land is living, land is slippery, land is something that sticks to our body. So in the foothills, in the border area, when you go, you don't see the land to actually say that this is Naga area, this is Mishing area, this is Okhomia area, but you look at the faces, right? They'll say, oh, yet Naga manu ase, so yet Nepali manu ase, yet Adivasi manu ase, right? So the land and the body kind of like really, really becomes almost sticky and kind of a gum. And that's the entire basis of adopting a feminist framework right there, right? Because there in a space for us, the body, the woman's body is so gendered. And for us then to be working in a region like South Asia, where we have seen partitions, right? Whether it's the eastern side or the greater Punjabi partition, Kashmir is a good example. Some of the most violent displays, performances of chauvinism, of nationalism is what? Like mapped onto the women's body. And I was thinking of how would it look like if we bring that into the foothills. You make an exciting point about big events, right? Like, what do we do about big events? And I think what I did was that, and by that I mean, remember the Adivasi grandfather who is narrating that, oh, the Second World War? I remember because during the Second World War, I saw American soldiers here in the foothills, and he could never forget that. And this was something that I made sure I captured in my book. And I'll tell you why, because from the region that we all come from, called Northeast India, we seem to belittle ourselves quite a lot, right? As thinkers, as writers, and because I've interacted with students over decades, right, over years, whenever I come back, we're even ashamed to actually, at times, describe or think about a research proposal aloud because we are already convinced in our mind that it's not important enough and nobody will be interested, right? And this conditioning actually is both a pedagogical violence and a historical violence, a colonial violence that's happening, really kind of a very, very oppressive conditioning right there and then. I I don't know if the student has zoomed in here or is listening, but I always am fascinated when students are describing the research to me and say that, my research is really insignificant, right? It's so small, it wouldn't matter to anyone. And that's not true, right? It matters to all of us. And that's the reason when I write about the region, I invert, I kind of like just makes everything upside down. I make the region the center of the world to talk about what's happening, right? And I'm not saying that we need to be arrogant, but we need to have that kind of confidence that the people that we're writing about matters, and the village and the towns where you go and write about, that is the center of your universe, right? So unless and until you adopt that kind of generosity and respect and trust to be writing about communities we write about, as a researcher, our voice is choked, right? And I think you captured it very well. So thank you for doing that. In terms of the ethnic assertions and the purity, I think I referred to Lisa Malki's work, Purity in Exile, and that was the key work, her work in Tanzania, working among the Hutus and the Tutsis about the idea of purity. How do we then understand insider, outsider? I think at the end of the day, for me as a feminist anthropologist, the idea of the insider outsider is often played on the women's body. Men never go through that, right? As long as you're able to acquire property, or you have a right to inheritance, you don't think about that much. The idea of the insider outsider becomes really crucial when it comes down to resources, right? And I think that kind of I think helps us to think, right, about autonomy, about Article 371, and about the different kind of assertions we have, including in Assam, the assertion for borderland as a state, for the Dimasa homelands as a state, for Karbi Anglong to become a state. And I leave it to the young people to think about this conceptually, in a very, very grounded sense. So thank you so much. The fourth one, Pranav Pegu, indigeneity and development. You're working on that, and I think your take on carbon fantasies is really fascinating and amazing. And you kind of really pick up on the topic, right? Spot on about surely indigenous people, tribal groups are really homogenized, right? When it comes to their assertions and when it comes to their positions on resources. And actually, that's a problem right there, right? That's a problem right there, because it's the rich, it's the elite who will say all the good things. It's these people who organize the ethnic festivals. It's these people who are selling our cultures, and turning us into dancers. I mean, Nagaland is a good example where people are dancing so much that, I don't know where is the idea of culture as politics, isn't it? And so when it comes to desiring coal and oil, what do we do? I think you are spot on in understanding that, the trouble is in actually homogenizing and making tribal assertions and identity as one. Right? Look at the poor, right? Look at the poor and look at their fantasies. Look at the rich. The rich can talk about development. The kids of the rich people, come on, it's their future in the region, isn't it? They'll go to the Ivy Leagues. They'll come back and they'll have palm oil plantations. They'll buy helicopters. They'll fly in jet planes. But they'll be the ones talking about development and progress. And it's these poor people that I write about in the foothills, whose kids can't get a proper education, who will become coal miners in the foothills, who can't have access to this kind of articulation, right, that you and I can have going to university. They will be looked down as people who are evil because they want the small mines. They do rat hole mining. But the larger issue is something else, right? You will blame the Gentia and the Khasi, poor man who is a manager in a coal mine, but you won't make, let's say, the chief minister accountable, isn't it? Because he's so smooth, because he speaks English. He's like, no, just like us, right? Like, I understand that language. And I think what I'm saying is very provocative right now. But if we have to be researchers and think critically about it, we have to see how that makes sense. And it doesn't mean that I'm putting anyone down. It just means that how do we think about resource extraction? Australia is a very good example, because here in Australia, the indigenous people are deeply divided when it comes to resource extraction, right? There is a pro-extractive group, there is an anti-extractive group, and they're very open about it. And on that line, even the environmentalists, the white environmentalists, the white Australian environmentalists have to take a very difficult position. Because if you're a white environmentalist, remember Jack Kosak's book, Understories, right? the history of environmentalism is also very entrenched with colonization. So what do we do then? If you're a do-gooder white environmentalist, or you just want to eat vegetarian food, not use plastic bag, and save the world, and you have a tribal person right here saying that no, I want my coal, yeah, koila lage. What do you do? Shit, man, right? Your entire idea of doing good and value is all gone like out of the window. I think that's when the bigger issues of justice, that's when the bigger issues of making the state accountable, of education, of healthcare comes in. Because majority of the people that I work with in the foothills, one illness in the family and the money is gone. None of them are going to become rich. Yeah. So that becomes very, very kind of core and important. So thank you for pointing that out. The fifth person, I think, Kiran, hi. Oh my gosh. I think you do international relations and you do maritime relations, and so thank you so much for reading the book so thoroughly.
Yeah, we'll wait for her to join back.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Hi. Sorry, I think my connection wasn't too good. Yeah. So can I come to Kiran's point?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So hi, Kiran. Thank you so much for reading the book, and your reference to chapter 6 and 7 is, I mean, very important, right? These two chapters are very difficult to write, and kind of I struggled with it. And militarization, right? This is when really militarization and the militarized world that I'm talking about becomes visible. I think in between you also referred to the Hat Bazaars, right? And then you referred to the Balinese cockfight by Clifford Geertz. Of course, the idea of deep play, isn't it? So buying, selling, trading. There's a play. There's a play that's going on, and it's also a representation of the foothill social life, right? And so I think it's very, very important. I'll tell you a secret. When I was starting my PhD, actually, my entire PhD was supposed to be on this Hat Bazaar, which actually ended up being only a chapter, because when I went for my pilot study and then I came back, I write that in the introduction of my book. I think my very good friend, who was also a brother, was killed by the CISF, and that's when I just was very sad, and I didn't understand that. So my fieldwork started with the death of a very dear friend to whom the book is dedicated. And in my sorrow and in my inability to find an answer, going to the foothills and trying to understand what the hell is happening in this place, right? And so I didn't start the field work, and I didn't start my PhD from a place of knowing. I started it from a place of discovery. So maybe some of the chapters still looks, a little undone, a little fractured. And I would really like students or researchers engaging with the book to carry it forward to understand how this is done. You talk about the Indian state and agency, and do we see their agency well? Uh, I think the agency is very clear, when I talk about the anti-national. Remember, there's a section on the anti-national. And I wanted to actually really remember and invoke Dr. Rajan Gogoi's name, who was very central in helping me think about this chapter. He died. I think he died uh, uh, a month ago, and he lived all his life as a medical doctor, this person, a home doctor, very well loved. And through the 80s and the 90s, I would say even starting from the 70s, he really served the people in the hills, especially in eastern Nagaland, and all along this area. And this area, for those of you who come from Upper Assam, will know that it's the tri-junction of Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, and Assam. And for a large part of the year, the tri-junction in this border area is always under article, I think, section 144, and you cannot really kind of travel in this area because it's so heavily militarized. He lived there all his life, and he saw, right, kind of what you call the agency of the Indian state, and it was really visible through tortures, through the camp, through interrogation, right, through extrajudicial killings. He narrates an entire story about his own torture at the hands of the Indian security forces, and I made sure that I put it here. The last question that you have is like, who do we blame, right? I think this is, for me, about engagement, because as citizens we have to engage, right? I think maybe politicians blame, but for us as citizens we engage, right? We kind of enter into dialogues, and I think this becomes very important, because once we enter the blame game, it doesn't help, because it doesn't start conversations. It doesn't allow us to sit in the same room. To who do we blame would lead us to an Arnab Goswami kind of a show, right? How do we engage and how do we dialogue? And I say this really as somebody who's earnest, looking at a region where we have multiple ceasefires, and I myself have worked with themes and with topics on human rights, reconciliation, with citizenship, and we have to engage and we have to dialogue through very, very difficult issues as communities, as citizens. And I think this is what I believe in. The last one, Ariandam, hello. So you work in informal economic activities, and I think this is such a lovely way for me. You have given me a gift, I would say, to end, my response, because you ask about theory from the field, and this book, and also my other books that I've written. Living the Land, and also Ceasefire City, my new book that came out this year, on my hometown, Dimapur, is really theory from the field, right? And as an anthropologist, this is what I do. I go talk to people, and I have feminists, I have anthropologists, I have social theories like Lefebvre or even Doreen Massey who follow me through. These are people that I read in grad school, and I was deeply influenced by it. But the most important side for me is actually engagement, right? When I go to communities, when I go to the world around us. And so if I can give you a gift again, as you're preparing to do field work, maintain a field note every day, no matter how drunk you are, how tired you are. You have to promise yourself that you're going to write your field notes every night. Okay. When I was in the foothills, in a lot of the villages, there was no electricity, so they would kind of turn off the fire. They would blow up the candles. So I always made sure I had a torchlight, under my mosquito net, and I would switch it on and I would write. And I felt like a little girl, being like mischievous. When the entire household was sleeping, I would be writing my notes. And when I was writing my thesis, that's what saved me, not the interviews. Because the interviews were transcriptions, right? My field notes, and that was actually what made chapters like Morom come up, right? Because the misery of the place, and just the villages being empty, and that was something in 2009-10, and 10 years down the line, a lot of the Naga villages are empty because of out migration, right? And so Ariandam, do yourself a favor, field notes, please, right? If you forget, just write to me and say, Dolly ma'am, just send me a song so that I can remember my field notes, and I'll send you some Rolling Stones song. All right, so I'll stop now.
Thanks, Dolly. Just as a slight aside on him, he was a very good ethnographer. He did his masters with us, and he's done a very good dissertation. Anyway, so let me open it up now in case if there are more questions from the audience, if there's anyone else who has a question they'd like to ask. We have, yes, Mijinsha.
Okay. Hi, ma'am. My question is probably you have already answered this question, this particular, issue which I'm going to ask. Actually, the custom of Sauri or compulsory labor exchanges in our area we call it Sauri. So, or compulsory labor exchanges is usually known to exist within a homogeneous ethnic group in a region like the foothills, where it is the meeting ground for various ethnic groups. Is there a possibility that Sauri can be an institution to perpetuate hierarchy? And if so, how would it work in a heterogeneous ethnic, uh, milieu? Another thing,
Yeah.
well, so in the Bodo areas, uh, in the name of Sauri, the moneyed buy off their need to provide labor in exchange for money. In certain instances, in the name of practicing Sauri, laborers are paid off with a feast, with the crucial element of reciprocity being absent. My question is, since I have already pointed out, can Saudi be an institution to perpetuate hierarchy? And if so, how would it work in an heterogeneous ethnic milieu? Eagerly waiting for the upcoming film Wild Swans, Gorai Fakri, where you have a cameo role now.
Oh my god! sorry, sorry. That was, oh, really? Do I didn't know that. Hey, hang on. All right. Okay. Mizansi, thank you so much for your question. Howry, I wrote about it from the field work that I did, and you are right. There can be different permutations and different kinds of practices. There's an example. Do you remember I give of Howry kind of a practice on the upper elevations of the village, and it's known as Ejon Voro in the Lotha Naga language. And Ejon Voro means actually peer group, right? A peer group who goes from one farm to the other as friends and help out. When I asked the elders in the village in the upper elevations of the mountains, they said that they actually don't do Hauri with the Adivasis and the Assamese people in the valley because they want to keep it among themselves. And I don't know if it's Murilo or whether it's Mokokcho, right? So it's really within the clan. The foothill, I conducted fieldwork with very heterogeneous, very, very diverse. And what really caught my attention here was perhaps not the perpetuation of hierarchy as I saw it from my field side, but really, how can I say, a mutual reciprocity that was there because some of the women were married into the other women's families as well when it came to clan and kinship ties. But you are right. There can be different variations, and I'm sure that in Borderland, given that it's also a very very diverse landscape, there can be different ways of understanding the idea of reciprocity. And going back to actually the Mausian idea, right, of the gift of reciprocity, how do we do it? Even in, let's say, in a social setting, if someone comes to help us, what do? Do we pay them off with money? If they are equal, we would never do that, right? If they are like maybe somebody who comes to your house to clean your house in Guwahati, you won't go to their house and work, right? You would expect them to come to your house and work. There are different permutations, but from my I think context in the foothills, I was looking at this particular practice of Hauri between I think almost people from the same socio-economic background, right? I have to underline that. So and that this was my observation.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, Vijay. If I can just add to that also, it also reminded me, in fact, of I don't remember what the institution was called, but fundamentally very similar institution in Tanya Lee's book, Land's End. And she actually talks about this practice, this traditional practice of exchange of labor, when as they moved to commercial cash cropping and as the entire system of production changed, it took on this form that Mijinsha just gave this example, where more well-off families, in fact, escape paying wages and simply give a feast and have labor come, but never, in fact, reciprocate that labor.
Yeah.
So the political economy and relations of production within which the exchange happens and the imperative for the exchange, I guess,
That
also influences the shape.
it's very important. And Mijincha, I would like you to explore more about this, because if that's happening among certain powerful families, right? Where they're too faced and the poor people come and work, they leave. I would like you to explore, actually, is there an underlayer of patronage, right? Of security that they provide, right? Security, patronage. Is there some kind of political of how and protection of this kind of data thing, right? That's happening. Because if we look at other kinds of anthropological work, there's also that entire anthropological work on the haftar, right? The dada who comes to collect that just to provide security. And so, yeah, I think you're onto something. So I would really encourage you to follow that up.
Are there any other questions? There's one from YouTube. There's Manoranjan Ghosh who's asking, how would you connect the discourse of carbon citizenship in the context of global warming and recent climate change?
I don't know. You tell me. For me, the idea, for me, I was thinking about the notion of carbon citizenship more through a militarized landscape. And I think once again it goes back, to some of my environmentalist friends who tell us, who are very provocative, and they say, just because you carry power, that's not going to save the world, right? And I think as middle class people, we're very complicit in that. No, oh, don't use plastic bag, you'll save the world. I think it's all bullshit after a point, right? But why I'm telling you, because there's this entire, I mean, look at India's carbon policy and what they are doing. India and Australia has this huge carbon mineral pact, right, where they are going to have a new initiative on extractive drives, and they are absolutely thrilled and happy that India has declared itself that it's going to mine for more coal and be coal dependent. And so I think what I'm doing in my book is something very, very, very small, and perhaps twisting the lens into looking at a militarized resource frontier and how the history of carbon, whether it's oil or coal, mining, looks from perhaps the foothills and the ground. And a lot of students write to me, and they're going to do some amazing work. A lot of them are writing super pieces. Someone from IIT, I think one of your professors, Arup's piece on colonial mines, and also Ditimoni, who wrote a PhD from IIT Guwahati, is teaching in Assam. Super piece. So a lot of people have been engaging, and that's the reason that from a region where we have, the distribution of free palm oil seeds going on, I think we need to think together what's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any more questions from people? Yes, Pranab.
Yeah, my question is regarding your fieldwork, and I have seen that you have encountered a lot of gender encounters, and you have faced lots of prejudices, like maybe coming from some casteist notion. So how do you deal these things? I mean, in a field like you're speaking face to face, and they're speaking something else which is against you or against your people. So how do you deal these things?
There's another question. Do you want to take that as well? Or
I didn't get it.
Yeah. Okay. Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Basundar, I can hear the question. Yes, you are. Is it who am I talking to?
I'm talking about your field experiences, and I'm asking you how do you deal with the prejudices that you come across in the field? I mean, assumptions. I mean, you came across lots of encounters which are like very. It might be very awkward as well. So I don't know how do you deal with those.
So when he asked the question the first time around, he mentioned gendered as well as sort of casteist ideas that
Yeah, yeah.
that they were sort of depending on the community you're coming from, or maybe around Nagas in general. So how did you deal with that when you were in the field?
Um, well, that's the strange thing, right? Because for me, that I can't pretend to be a white person. I am who I am. I'm a Naga. I'm doing fieldwork in the Northeast, right? And I think this totally kind of puts the idea of the insider outsider ethnographer like on its head, because as much as we would like to think that it's very easy for an insider, my white friends who come from Australia and from the United States have a better time in the Northeast because everyone's eager to talk to them, right? Because they're experts. um, and so that's very important. So for instance, when I come to the Northeast, I'm just that, oh, that Naga scholar who is around, what does she know? Right? Let's face it, it's very much there. That kind of prejudice, and then it also depends that if you come with a political history of human rights and what you're doing, you're already kind of, oh, this is the kind of activist scholar, we are not up to that. We are really into that intellectual world, and so there are a lot of layers, and I'm very clear about where I stand, right, in terms of my positions on gender, calling myself as a Naga feminist, which is not very acceptable. And so perhaps that question about prejudices, I think it's very inherently visible. And I think we need to ask ourselves, what do we do with one another, right? What is acceptable in terms of research? And so I can't like run away, like quote unquote, from the field, because I mean, what is a field? It's not that it detaches from us, right? Even though I'm in Melbourne right now, Melbourne is also my field. This is my university space, right? So we have different kinds of hierarchies and different kinds of prejudice. I'm a colored tribal faculty member here in an international university. So do you think that makes it easy for me? It's not, isn't it? If you see an Asian face like that for a white kid, it's like, what does she know? She's an Asian woman. She's supposed to be selling groceries in a shop, right? In India, it's like, what does she know? Except for tribal studies, she won't know anything. What will she tell me about Foucault, right? It has to be a Brahmin person or a white person who can explain Foucault better than a Naga, right? So in terms of the field, the intellectual space, the university space, constantly I see it. And does it affect me? I guess not, because I see this as a collective struggle. Yeah, I see this as a collective struggle, and I really do believe in solidarity in spaces like this, where we can openly talk about it, right, and not hide behind. Because the academy is a very, very good space where people seem to be indifferent and seem to be pretentious, right? That it doesn't affect us, but it does, and I think I'm somebody who talks very openly about it.
Yeah, thanks. Saurabh, you have a question?
Yeah, actually, it was on a similar line, and you kind of have explained a lot. But still, I'll just point out the other question that I was thinking of. And so it's mostly about the research part of the book, and as like as students like us who are aspiring to do ethnographic work, like your book was very important in a sense that like how it showed us that even the most mundane activity is so important in ethnography, and how these are always within a context which is social, political, economical, and geographical, and always bound by intersectionality and other power relations, and also how every aspect of it completes the picture to understand the space as this foothill where ideas of development coincide with extraction, conflicts, and aspirations and desires. So just after, so just what got me thinking was this whole scholarship of decolonial methodologies that come up, indigenous methodologies that come up, like the work of Linda Tuivai Smith and others. Sort of the indigenous gazing back, and all the concern that you just talked about, how we are perceived in the academic world, and how it is judged that there will always be an indigenous bias. And but there is an emerging scholarship that talks about it and accepts this position, and uh, talks like further of the importance. And we have seen this happen in New Zealand and other places a lot. But so since you are from here, you're from Northeast, and that's why like I just wanted to know from you, like how do you think your position as an indigenous person of this space, doing an ethnographic research or any kind of research in this space, add so much more value and importance in this work that you've done. And how, and also like reading about all the patriarchal relations and everything, how did your social position as a woman, and also as a intermarried woman, and as a professor from a reputed institution, shape this research? Like what would be missed, or what would be different? Yeah, that's it.
Wow. Okay. So it's many things together, right? So I can sense that you're giving me a comment and hopefully compliment about my work. Thank you very much. And also within that are questions which I'll try to extrapolate. But thanks so much. Right? Thanks. And that's the reason why when you guys invited me, when Vasundhara was very kindly inviting me, I really wanted students to engage with the book, right? So instead of me coming for an hour and just like talking out of my head and telling you how brilliant I am, I wanted to listen to your critics, and I wanted to see how you will read the book, because it feels so good, right? So thanks for being honest and asking me questions about decoloniality, about who I am in terms of as a thinker. um, what really helps me is solidarity, right? And I can see so many names here, who are logging in, talking together, thinking together, and I think that's very key, right? Yet when we are sensitive to one another, it becomes very important. It's not that we have to agree all the time, right? There can be disagreements, but how do we do, in terms of holding on to respect? And my work, my involvement with the human rights movement goes a long way, to the 90s, right? I have been part of the Naga people's movement for human rights since 1996, 97. I went to law school in 97. I went to grad school very late. By the time I got my PhD, I was in my late 30s. I got my first job here at Unimel, after my 40. And so perhaps I've seen a little bit of life, that I'm not a 25-year-old, like assistant professor. And I bless them, very good. They had very good guidance. My parents didn't go to university. My mother dropped out. My father didn't finish high school. My mother dropped out, I think, when she was like PU first year or something. She had to go back to the village and work. I'm very grateful for what I have. One thing that I'm amazed, when I became faculty, is that the university and the academics really whinge about how hard they work. They never say the good salaries that we get, right? During the pandemic, we are all getting a salary. We all have we all have money in our banks. I come from a human rights movement where very few of us could transition into research, right? I can think of my husband, and I think if some of I can see Arup's name here. Arup would know basically, right? Very few of us from the human rights movement in the Northeast transition into the academic space. And I think we were very lucky. Maybe it was a fluke in the system that we got in. I don't know, right? Maybe we don't deserve to be here. But I'm very grateful for what I have. And I think it's this space in one lifetime that I have been able to experience both, really community activism that I started out with as a young woman, and now the academic space and the privileges that comes with it. It is amazing. And having said that, surely, there are challenges, but I am very hopeful that the conversations that we can have, with academics, with communities, with students, will lead to something meaningful. In terms of, I think, decoloniality and, where do I see myself as a woman? Of course, I'm very fortunate to have a very loving husband. Mr. Sanjay Babra loves me very much. Like, I'll declare that. publicly. It'll be, Vasundhara, you'll never invite me to IIT again. Listen, man, I'm telling you. I think half of your audience has left. They're like this stupid woman rambling, right? Who does she think she is? I think no academic would come on a space like this and say that their partners love them, but he does. So I'm very grateful. I think I'm very grateful for friends that I see on this kind of like people I see here right now currently listening to me. Thank you all so much, for being friends, for being allies, for being colleagues, and my heart is filled with gratitude as somebody who belongs to the region, because for all the challenges, trust me, the love that we have and the solidarity and how we hold on to one another, I think it is exceptional. So there you have it. Yeah.
Thanks, Dolly. Thanks. Yes, I mean, I think we don't talk enough about love, even love and emotions and feelings when we talk about academic research and fields. So thanks for that. Are there any more questions? We are sort of around the time that we need to wrap up. With you, Parvati.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Let me start by saying that I really enjoyed your talk. I had a small question. So I come from an economics background, and I wanted to ask you, based on your fieldwork and the research you have done for the book and your readings, also, have you noticed any common patterns that emerge when, globalization and other new economic forces sort of make their way into ethnic communities that have for over many years developed their own economic systems over their society, their own kinship-based, reciprocity-based systems. So, be it in the Northeast or maybe in the case of Aborigines in Australia, have you noticed that are there any common patterns that we can see when this economic shift happens? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Parvati. The immediate one that pops up for me is how the term culture is used in different ways. So culture can actually mean progress, can mean development. So for the well-being, for the culture of the people, and how in the Northeast, and also I think in parts of Latin America, the the aspects of gender, right? The gender is actually equated, one, with heteronormativity, and secondly with livelihood. And I think third that I see is in terms of globalization and the economics of it, what's really key and important is that when we think the plantation economy has come to an end at this time and age in the 21st century, we find a revitalization of that, right? And that's scary because I'm thinking about Tanya Morelli's new book that's coming out on palm oil in Indonesia, right around the time when the government of India is planning new palm oil plantations in the Northeast. I'm thinking about the coffee plantations in Nagaland. I'm thinking about different kinds of plantation experiments that go on all over the Northeast. So I think with globalization, what's happened is really the take on culture, gender, and the revitalization of plantation that's happening.
Thanks. Okay, there are a couple of questions that we can take up from YouTube. Are there any more questions? Maybe we'll take sort of one last round of questions. Anyone who's here in Teams, anyone else who wants to ask a question? Okay, so let me just read out these two questions. There's a question from Santosh Hansu who's saying, can you tell us more about the Hauri? When and how did this practice start? How different is it from forms of different tributary forms of labor extraction in pre-colonial and colonial period? And the other question is from Akanksha Sharma. She says, thanks, Dr. Kikon, for the brilliant book and discussion. Heard a moving quote about storytelling as healing. Considering the violence and trauma Northeast has seen, did you find evolutions in stories of trauma and healing? And then she says, thank you once again for everything you write and shared here once again. And her quote that she wanted to point out to was storytelling as a way of healing from violence and trauma for marginalized communities. Yeah, so her question is, did you find evolutions in stories of trauma and healing?
What is the meaning of that? Evolution in?
Stories of trauma and healing.
And in what context? I didn't get that question. Stories of healing.
So she said, heard a moving quote about storytelling as healing, which is as healing from violence and trauma for marginalized communities. So
Yeah.
when you were in the field, considering the violence and trauma that the Northeast has seen, did you find evolutions in stories of trauma and healing?
Well, so okay, so I'll try to address that, but I really quite didn't understand evolution and in what sense it was being used. But thank you so much for that, right? So maybe I'll take the larger term storytelling, healing, trauma. I think it's very core and central to who we are as communities across the Northeast, right? Where how can I say, it's very different here. Let's say in Australia, where I live currently, when you ask people how are you doing, it's like, I'm good, and maybe that's the same culture inside IIT as well, campus. But yeah, in the larger world, among the communities, once you ask how are you, right? It's like 1 hour. You better be ready. I'm going to tell you, right? I'm going to tell you like who died in my community, what happened. I'm going to tell you what happened to me. So 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 I think stories are what binds us, what keeps us together. And as an ethnographer, it's been core, right? The narrative style has been core to me, both as a writer and as a thinker. And when I think about stories, both in terms of healing and trauma, I can trace back my time as working in the human rights movement and documenting, right? So the reason that I ended up doing law and also anthropology, at the core foundation of it were really my mentors. My mentors were not academic mentors to start with. They were really human rights mentors from the villages, who taught me what it meant to be patient. So across the Northeast, maybe in the late 90s, early 2000s, when we would go for fact finding, we didn't have money, and there would be times when the cars would break down, when the buses would break down, and for hours we would be stranded somewhere in the highway. And I would be very annoyed, right? Because I wanted to get from place A to place B. And they taught me to learn to wait. They taught me, and the thing is that I grew up with a single mom, right? In the Naga society, I grew up with a single mom. I grew up in a very tribal, oppressive, patriarchal system, where imagined, to be growing up with a single mother in the 80s was really difficult in Naga society. And so I grew up to be, I wasn't this talkative. When you actually go back to my human rights, mentors, elders, you ask them in Assam, Nagaland, Manipur, they'll say, this girl never talked, right? I was a quiet one. And they taught me to talk. They gave me language by making me tell stories, right? By making me ask questions when we went to the village. So that's how I came into the world of storytelling. And for me, storytelling then is connected with language and with text, right? And also with different forms, and it can be performance as well, became very key and important. The idea of, I think, Hauri, once again, is I would really say that this practice that I saw in the foothills may vary. And it's not only in the region that we come from, across the Eastern Himalayas. The idea of reciprocal labor service was something that even Michael Taussig talked about in his book, Devil and Commodity Fetishism, right? So in the highlands of Colombia, in the coffee, sugarcane growing areas, if you look at that book, Devil and Commodity Fetishism, it's into two. The first part is actually his field work. The second part, he acknowledges, is June Nash's work on the teen miners of Bolivia, where the idea of the spirit world is really under the ground and above the ground, right? And so in this sense, we are looking at really plantation economies. We are really looking at places with a history of militarization and colonization, where there are different kinds of labor services and communities who are engaging with one another, right? So I'm very glad that some of you have really caught on the practice of Hauri. And remember, it's not only in the part of the world that we come from, it's also there across, I think, Latin America, the highlands of Bolivia. So that's the spectrum that I want you to have as you explore more about it. There can be different kinds. one kind that I was exploring was really between similar economic status women groups, right? And particularly the Adivasis and the Nagas. And I was exploring that in relation actually to, let's say, what do landed Adivasi and Naga families do, right? As opposed to the landless ones who get adopted. So if you look in Assam and Nagaland, so many families adopt Adivasi kids, which is so scary, right? They adopt Adivasi kids. Even a couple of weeks ago, in yeah, in parts of Assam, I think where was this? Sorry, I'm this friend of mine who's a human rights activist, Sangeeta Tete, is following up a case in Assam where a 13-year-old Adivasi maid was alleged to have committed suicide. So you see what I'm saying? So I was talking about this kind of practices, really, relevant, prevalent among landed Adivasi families and Naga families. So, I mean, just to put it out there. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much, Dolly. I think we've had a good discussion, and high five to managing to get students to engage, interact, talk, speak, read. So that that was a success. um, so thanks so much for sort of taking your time out, for being with us. Thanks to all the students for having spoken, having sort of shared, engaged with the work, etc. And thank you all for being here. There's a lag, I think. Is there a lag? I'm gonna wait for 2 minutes just to let the lag catch up.
I think it's fine. Yeah, I think we can end it. I can hear you, Vasundhara. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, so thanks everyone. So we'll bring this to a wrap, and thank you all for attending. Thanks, Dolly.
Thank you all.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Bye then.
Sure. Yeah.